Welcome to the Strap and Link podcast, where we cover brands from their inception to their latest release.
It's the Montress Tudor.
Like I said, better movement, spring drive
So,
potentially, Rolex Oyster Perpetual.
There's Super Ocean Heritage. Now you see this kind of renaissance of Tudor. Finally, in 2016, they achieved the spring drive with an 8-day power. The podcast for watch lovers by watch lovers. New episodes every first and third Monday of the month.
Woo! Coming in hot. We got some new technology up in this.
Couldn't hear it from my end, but I bet it sounded great.
What's going on, brother? I know. It came out of my speakers and not my headphones, but nonetheless.
All right, well, we'll take it. I'm sure everybody else enjoyed it.
Yeah, we got buttons up in here. Yeah, usually we just I've got some files and we knock it out in post.
Yeah. It's all a surprise for me.
Yeah, we tried to get it working last week and just wouldn't do it. But what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Strap and Link with your host, Brett and David. Got another fun episode today. We're going to talk about JLC and get into some goodies there. But I guess a lot to catch up on. We hadn't really talked that much lately, man. How you been?
It's been a little while. Yeah, it's been good. Yeah. When you leave the country, that happens. You know, I held down the fort down here in the southeast, and you went and explored the world, and I'm sure enjoyed a few international watch stores that your friends that you were with, I'm sure vastly enjoyed as much as you.
I did go to a watch store in Amsterdam, but I went by myself. I woke up. Jordan was still asleep, so I shot the text over there, but got no response. We're staying in separate rooms, of course, so I shot the text, didn't hear anything back. Got a quick shower and walked on over. Checked in on some Rolex inventory, but alas,
make sure Rolex is still doing good. You got to check in on them every now and again. Make sure they're holding up to the standard.
It was funny. I mean, I heard this guy in there. He wasn't like upset about them not having any Rolex inventory, but he was definitely, I guess, badgering would be a good word to use. So he's sort of badgering this sales associate, and he wasn't American, but I don't know. I don't know. I guess it just doesn't matter. And she's like, look, sir, I'm sorry, but it's a very popular model. And he's like, yeah, I know, but he's like, I'm gonna be back, and when I come back through the next time, and she's just like deadpan, and she just goes, is there another model that I could interest you in?
So is there another model that I can tell you also can't have?
Yeah. So I don't know what he was looking for. Maybe the titanium Yachtmaster or something.
Yeah.
That was the only thing that I asked him for. I was like, do you have any Rolex inventory, any Yachtmasters? And no. So it's always the case. But I didn't buy anything. I wanted to the actual dealer that I went into, well, I guess it was the same. I went into two stores technically, but one was in the airport. It's the same company. Gassan, I assume is how you pronounce that, similar to a Mayors, I would assume. They carried, every brand that, you and I like and love, and which was really awesome. But the one in the airport actually was a little bit more intriguing, because the one in the city that I walked over to, it had kind of the usual things that you would expect to see. And they did have Tudor, and they had Breitling, and I looked at some of that. But when I got to the airport, to wrap this up, long story short, they had a white dial Panda chronograph from Tudor, which are, somewhat hard to come by in the States, especially new.
Yeah, especially seeing them in store. You normally have to order them.
Exactly. So saw one of those new, as well as a Pelagos that I'm a bit interested in. And, of course, I'm crunching the numbers. This is like 30 minutes before I boarded to come back home, and I'm crunching numbers, and I'm like, all right, what is this? It was $1,500 US less at retail.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I wanted to, didn't get anything. Someone needs to buy my Grand Seiko Bamboo, and then we'll have a new watch to talk about. But, but Amsterdam was fun, man. The watches were pretty minimal. I apologize. I didn't take a lot of pictures for people. Maybe really just like, I think just two.
You enjoyed the trip, which is what a lot of people don't do most of the time now. They just take the pictures and go from there. But it was funny. When I went to the Bahamas in June, we went to Nassau, to Atlantis, and they had, of course, big watch, all the luxury shopping there. And there was a Rolex store, and then there was, I forget the name of the place, but there was another store that had all the non-Rolexes in. And honestly, a lot of family members and all the girls and all would go to the Rolex store, but I just sit my butt over at the other store and just look at JLCs. They had
Yeah.
Bulgari, Tudor, obviously Breitling, Omega. I was just so much more enamored over there. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't need to walk into a Rolex store and see that, hey, no, you cannot buy one. Okay. First day I walked in there, nothing, right? No. Okay. Never went, I went back
Yeah.
once maybe. So it's fun going to see all these other stores and really seeing brands that you don't really see, like Bulgari and JLC, obviously, that we're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that really fired up my passion to talk about it this soon in the podcast world. But I mean, it's, again, great brand. I think we're really looking forward to talking about this. And to me, I mean, this is up there, with Rolex, if not even higher, with the Vacheron is what I kind of level up JLC with.
Yeah.
Very high quality. I mean, just amazing movements. I mean, just the upper echelon of watchmaking. I mean, just blows all the other ones. And I honestly, I mean, just quality wise, I think is steps above Omega, Breitling, all those as well. You're up there in that top niche that we've talked about, of course, with Rolex. But if you don't know JLC, listen to this podcast, go look up some watches online. Of course, as always, we'll post a few, but I think you'll really fall in love with this brand like we have.
Yeah, and like you said, it was really fun to see some of the other watches too. There was Vacheron, may have been
Always great.
Yeah, it may have been only the second or the third time that I've seen some Vacheron models in person in a store. That was definitely the coolest part about that store, was just that they carried so many brands. We have some stores that do that, but like locally we have Brown and Co. and like Mayors that you and I most often go to.
They just
Brown &
all
Co's,
they all carry the same watch. Brown and Co. has a few, like they have IWC and some watch brands that you don't maybe see as much, but I feel like all the watch big names, Brombergs in Birmingham, Mayors, Brown and Co., all of them carry the same dang brands.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, which one do you want to buy from? There's not one that just, other than of course Brown and Co., they have the IWC and Mayors in the Lenox Mall has a few, but different ones. But I feel like they're all the same.
So Brown & Co. actually, funny enough that you say that, they actually do carry JLC now. They
Really?
no longer
Okay.
carry Omega. Yeah, I went in there.
Really? Oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
I think I told you I went there, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago or something. But yeah, they've
Okay.
kind of flip-flopped there. I don't know how that happens.
I
but it
love that
does.
they did Brown and Co. I would have thought they would have getting rid of IWC before Omega. I mean, that's upper top 3.
Yeah,
But
like I said, I have no idea how that. I don't know if it's like a the retailer has to pay to play. Never really looked into that, but so yeah, there are some reversos there now, which was nice.
Okay.
I got to see some of those. I didn't handle any that day. I knew I was really not in there to purchase anything, and I didn't want to waste, honestly, their time or mine. So I didn't handle anything, but yeah, they are there. We should go check them out sometime, because
I love putting on JLCs. When I did again in June, it blew me away. Again, Cartier, I know we've talked about them. The Santos, I love when I wear that watch, but I don't really love the tanks. Like the tanks look good in pictures, but I just don't like the way it really fits. But JLC's switched that all the way around, where I loved, it almost scared me after trying on tanks, thinking, I might not like the JLCs. I love the look, I love the idea of it, but of course, as we always talk about, when it's on your wrist, it's different. But
yeah.
JLC was definitely, I think you'll find it the same way when you put it on your wrist. It holds up to the hype, especially the Reversos. Of course, I haven't tried on really. I don't think anything else from theirs. But
yeah. Well, that's a good segue. I think just kind of overarching what we just said, talking about Rolex. I did want to bring this up as a bit of news. Saw a pretty interesting article yesterday, and I mean, I guess it's not that it's new. I mean, this has been happening, but I think maybe interesting that it's a continuation, and that we are seeing some of the big brands take bigger hits versus smaller brands. So over the last month, Rolex prices on the aftermarket are continuing to fall, and like I said, pretty much along with everyone else, but we are seeing like some of the bigger brands, and I think some of the more overinflated brands, I think we're seeing them kind of crash back down to where maybe they should be, or where they have been,
or they are when
at
it's
times.
Not crazy times.
Exactly. Yeah. Times in the past where this has happened. So so to go by the numbers, Rolex saw 2.2% price decrease over the last month. For a little bit of comparison, Tudor saw a 1.8% decrease. Did read that, some smaller brands, micro brands, that are trading under, I believe the article quoted under 9,000 ish dollars at sale price. That's what they classified as like a smaller brand. And, for all I know, Tudor might have been in that. So a little bit,
Yeah.
a little bit misleading there, but nonetheless, those are decreasing as well, just at a slower clip. And yeah, I mean, top 50 brands, we're talking like top 50 turnover, and just, by the numbers, across the books over the last 6 months, I've seen a 5% decrease in prices. So, yeah, good news if you're one of those people that keep cash on hand and you are in the market. It's good news for that if you're in the aftermarket. But man, for us sellers, it's tough. Have you seen a lot of that? Because I know you're in a lot more forums than I am. A lot more like Facebook groups and forums and stuff like that. Have you kind of seen that as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, over the last year, you see it as times get uncertain, especially Rolex and other brands like that will continue to fall down until, times get back up. It's like the old saying, the millionaires are made in the bad times because they know they keep all the cash on hand and then they go and invest when everything's a lot less money.
Yeah.
It costs a lot more now. And the same thing with watch collections. You go buy, I know from personal experience, a lot of my family, they'll hold the cash on hand and then go buy the nice watches when it's half the price then, and then they just sit on it and still don't end up selling it when it's worth 10 times what it used to be. But it's fun to talk about the family dinners that you could. But it's now gear up the time. But of course, as always, these watches are not necessities. So if your job is unstable, or you're in sales and your sales are unstable, definitely don't go out there and just think, well, because I can get a Rolex for half the price I could 2 years ago, that I should do it.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of fun. It's why you don't need to hold your hat on, hey, I have a watch collection that is worth $100,000, because it might be worth $100,000 in 2022, but in 2024 it'll probably be worth 50. It ebbs and flows so much. But I've definitely seen that. And I think, Rolex obviously is falling the most. As we've always said, Rolex is just so built on marketing, and not even, I mean, good quality watches, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
but not just, I don't even want to know if I'd say not even JLC level quality, not Patek quality, not Vacheron quality, where, the movement there is just so outstanding and so intricate. Rolex is, an Oyster perpetual movement that's been around for 40 years now. They're data movements, but they can stick with it because they know what works and they'll market it up. But that being said, that is probably why their watches are going to fall much quicker than some of these others. They just have such an inflated price after the market. Obviously,
Yeah.
the higher you go, the farther you fall. So that
Yeah.
obviously it all makes sense. It's happened before. If you own a bunch of Rolexes and your head's spinning, I mean, you've probably been through this before. It happened in 08, it happened in 2010. It just always goes up and down. I mean, I know people that bought a Hulk for $4,000 4 years ago, and guess what? It went up to $30,000, and now it'll probably end up being back down worth about $5,000 to $10,000. So you just ride the waves, and it's not anything to be overly concerned about. And but it does happen. So for the crazy salespeople that say, "Oh, it'll never happen. Your Rolex will always be worth what is worth," that's bullcrap. Just like houses, houses will never go down value. It all comes in waves.
Usually not, but it can. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So,
And like, I like something you said, your collection might be worth X, 100 grand, 10 grand, 50 grand, whatever. But, I mean, but selling is a different animal,
oh yeah,
like if you're like me, I've got like all my watches I feel like are very different, and some are a little bit unique, and they're obviously not everyone's flavor. I've got a green dial watch that I'm trying to sell. Most people don't like green dial. So, yeah, if I have 10 Rolexes, that's easy to sell, but a lot of people don't have 10 Rolexes,
Yeah.
they might have some micro brands and a couple of Seikos, maybe one or two Rolexes, and, just different things. Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's always good to remember, how much effort and work that it takes to get those things moved in and moved out. So
You're supposed to be doing this for the love of the watch, not the
yeah.
status that comes with a lot of these watches. Because again, like anything, you throw your happiness in something else, it can be ripped away very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Well, let's move right along. And we are going to jump in to JLC in just a moment. Really quickly, if you don't, give us a follow on Instagram at Strap and Link. Also on TikTok, we're putting up some videos, short clips of our episodes. And pretty important here, if you do use often, or if you come across our link tree, which is that link in bio that we always talk about, we put that up on like Instagram stories when we're doing mailbag and just different things like that. So if you do use that, you'll notice now that that looks a little bit different. So kind of overhauled that, but also added in a new button for everyone to mail us your mailbag questions and watch stories. And on the last episode, we talked about that. Really wanting to get some cool and unique listener stories about maybe how you got your first watch, or just a watch that was maybe handed down to you, or hey, you traveled and you found a watch on a deal. Anything like that that you feel like asking or sharing us. Use that button to do so. That's also a pretty good place to share that out with your friends. So it's kind of one link and many purposes there. So feel free to do that if you do follow us. And then one last thing, just want to remind everyone, get 15% off at straphabit.com with code strapandlink15. So if you're in the market or in the mood for a little bit of a change to one of your watches, head on over to straphabit.com, use code strapandlink15 for 15% off. And with that, you want to jump into some JLC history?
Yes, and disclaimer here, we will mispronounce all of these words, so if you're a stickler about that, your trigger warning is here.
Probably so. Hey, I noticed like right after Rolex, it was funny. We had like a 2-to-1 listener ratio in America and Europe.
Yeah.
And now it's like 15-to-1. So I don't think that we have as many people that are going to be laughing at us potentially at the way that we pronounce things. But if you
Just
do
more
live
people
in that,
in America now, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But if you do live over there, like David said, here comes your trigger warning. So the company that became Jaeger-LeCoultre was founded in 1833 by Antoine Lecoutre in Le Sentier, Switzerland. Antoine started his company by inventing a machine that cut watch pinions. And he actually turned his family barn into the workshop to achieve that. So if everyone remembers, like I think in the Tissot episode, we talked specifically about this, but we're talking 1833, mid 19th century.
Yeah.
Back then it was very common for so many different people to make so many different components of watches. There was not this idea of in-house calibers and in-house movements. And I believe the Tissot episode specifically, we talked about Le Locle, Switzerland, which is one of the names of their models. It's where the company was basically born. And in that town specifically, more than half of the town's people actually professionally worked doing some type of watchmaking. So this was very common. And so Antoine Lecoutre again started his venture into watchmaking by cutting steel watch pinions. In 1844, Antoine made history again by creating the million meter, measuring instruments which measure movement within within a millionth of a meter. And I think that I'm pronouncing that right. Million meter.
Yeah, million meter. Yeah, I've heard it again.
Because there's an extra
a lot of
O
this.
yeah.
A lot of this is pronounced differently by depending on who you listen to.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that was the big I think first step that what I've read is in JLC's journey to just making their own watches and their movements. Definitely.
Yep. By the mid 1800s, the business then named Lecoutre and Chi had established a factory that employed 500 local watchmakers. Elie Lecoutre, Antoine's son, also joined the business around that time, and he became an integral part of the company. During the 1870s, the firm continued to refine watchmaking parts and techniques to make more reliable and accurate timepieces. Their production even included making movement blanks for Patek Philippe by this time. And by the 1880s, the business was recognized as the most important in that region of Switzerland, the most important business in that region of Switzerland due to the number of people that they employed and the production capacity that they had created for themselves. So very cool.
Yeah, so at the time in the early 1900s, Elie's son, Jacques David Lecoutre, became acquainted with a French watchmaker, Edmond Jaeger. And when he asked he was one of the top Swiss companies making timepieces at the time. using an ultra thin movement that he actually developed himself. The result in 1903 was the production of the world's thinnest pocket watch. And this was a watch made by Lecoutre using Jagier's movements, actually. So they teamed up together and figured out, hey, this worked out so nicely, maybe we should step off and do this together. And then finally in 1937, the two watchmakers joined forms and became what we know today as Jagier Lecoutre, or JLC, as I'm sure we will pronounce it for the remainder of this video. But stepping back a little bit, starting in 1907, a bunch of cool history here happened in the early 1900s. We talked about this a lot with Omega and a bunch of different brands that, I feel like they have a good 10, 20-year span that always is what propels them into the next stratosphere. And for JLC, I think it was the early 1900s, from about 1907 to really 1931 when they came out with the Reverso. But starting in 1907, there was a little jewelry company that Jaeger worked with and for, called Cartier. They wanted a true and reliable source for their watch movements, so they actually asked JLC to make their own in-house movements exclusively for Cartier. So starting in 1907, for I think about 14 years, they made all of the Cartier watches movements for, again, those 14 years. So if you have one, if you ever come across one, those are very rare, needless to say, and very valuable, having the two kind of run together. And again, at this time, JLC was really more known for their watchmaking capacities. Again, everybody, like Brett touched on, everybody did different things in the early 1900s, definitely in the 1800s, and they all kind of combined to make a watch, right? So JLC was just known and renowned, highly renowned in Europe for their watchmaking movements. So again, this wasn't just every aspect of the watch they still wanted to do at the time, they would do it, but being popularized at the time just for their watchmaking movements, and that's why that still carries on today.
Yep. And when that 14-year run ended, JLC fully dove into watchmaking for themselves. And to David's point, not so much making movements and components for other pieces. And fortunately for us, this is when the iconic JLC Reverso was born. So the Reverso was introduced to the market in 1931 by Lecoutre, designed as a response and an alternative, really, for polo playing British officers in India. Because to them, it was, of course, a great, it was just very annoying and I'm sure very costly for crystals in their watches to constantly be broken during polo competitions. So, so if anyone out there has ever wondered what the Reverso is actually designed for, it's so that you flip it over. It's a blank case back that is, of course, steel, and it's protected. And when you leave your polo match, flip it back over, boom, you know what time it is. So the JLC Reverso has an Art Deco design that is very true to the time that it was released. Famously features a rectangular inner case, which can be reversed or flipped over inside a larger rectangular base. The early Reverso models, also had to actually be fully slid over to the side before they could be flipped and then slid back into place. Now, using more modern components like spring-loaded ball bearings that just don't require the wearer to slip it all the way over to the side in order to latch it. For the first 60 years, the reverse side of the Reverso case was that plain steel that we talked about. And that could sometimes end up being engraved or decorated or monogrammed. I think that'll be a theme throughout the episode today. We'll talk about some of the design language from JLC. And in 1991, the 60 EME model, if anyone knows how we're supposed to pronounce that, please let us know. But the 60 EME model was actually the first to feature a display case back, while the 1994 Reverso Duo Face added a second dial to the reverse side. And as we all know today, I would think it's safe to say both of those went on to be quite popular and certainly catapulted JLC into international, I think, recognition and starlight. And as far as the Duo Face goes, as many people like to say, it is certainly like getting two watches in one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, for the price point, again, of course, if you just do the normal steel case back, it's going to be a little bit less. But for the price point of getting, like you said, two dials for the price of one watch, one Rolex or one, any other Vacheron, anything like that, it's definitely hard to compete against. And this is what I talked about. Obviously, it's going to be a lot more money than a Cartier. But I thought it was really cool going back on their history, how they actually came in together. Um, but Cartier costs a good amount of money if you want a certain one, and you still, for a rectangle watch, a rectangle dressy watch, um, you only get one dial. Where JLC Reverso rectangle, you can get two. So that's why I always lean towards JLC. If I'm gonna get me a rectangle watch at this caliber, I think JLC would definitely be the way to go.
I think for me personally, I look at it like Cartier are a jewelry company that make watches, and JLC
Hmm.
is a watch company that make jewelry.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look at it.
Oh yeah.
Similar price, similar design, but I just think for the true watch enthusiast, if the history, the horology, the movement, if all of that's what gets you going, then I would lean JLC for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. And kind of jumping off at that, again, we'll kind of jump back a little bit in time here. But of course, during World War II, JLC, just like many other watch companies that we've talked about on this, kind of did their part making highly accurate timing instruments for US and British forces. Again, these were more instruments even like in vehicles, not just, wristwatches that we talked about with Hamilton and others. So, of course, they did their part. And this is kind of something I wanted to talk about that's, again, very cool is JLC's known. We talk about Longines, Rolex, of course, all of these watch companies that are known for, making like clocks for, racing or clocks for, Olympic Games,
It's
stuff
like
like that.
timing,
Yeah,
timing
for timing
devices.
pieces.
Yeah.
JLC has done a lot with the automotive and aviation industry. So actually, there was a time in the 1900s where all the Bentley cars that were made actually had JLC
That's
timepieces in them.
awesome.
Yeah. So again,
That's
if you notice behind me, I have a JLC Jaeger poster behind, and you'll probably look at it and wonder, man, the Rolex has a watch dead center. JLC over here has a race car, a watch, and an airplane on it, just kind of signifying their history. So it's very cool. This was, I think, a newspaper from the 1930s, so it's just showing off what they
That's
did
cool.
during the time. So I think it's a cool little hidden part of history that, again, not a lot of people knew about. And being able to do this and having their branches out in so many different industries, you would wonder how somebody in, the early to mid 1900s could really do that. It was really because they had finally brought everything in house. Where again, in the early to mid 1900s, there weren't many like Vacheron. There were a few companies that
Yeah.
had everything in house because they were just so old. But a lot of these companies were still babies, hitting their first watches, hitting their stride like Omega we talked about, really didn't hit their full stride until the 50s.
Yeah.
And so these guys had already brought everything in house, so they had really taken over the industry. And again, around this time, they came out with a few of their other iconic pieces that are still around today that I think we'll talk about. The Memovox, which came out in the 1950s and allowed users to actually set a distinct alarm for going off while diving in the water, so you could actually hear the alarm through the waves. Or doing other timed activities by using another crown and switch off button. So very cool watch. I think Brett's going to talk about that. Another one was the Atmos watch, which actually got a lot of its power depending on where in the atmosphere you wore. So again, a lot of pilots wore that. Just very cool different watches that are around today. And as time continued on, the watch company began creating the Caliber 101, which is the world's smallest movement in a watch. So this is why even today you can tell that a lot of JLC's watches are known for being so thin. The Reverso we'll talk about, but I believe it's 8.5 millimeters.
Can we talk about the 101 real quick?
Yeah.
Did you do like any did you like look at some of the models that they have? They're like they're incredible.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that they've done. I mean, that's why earlier I said, I think Cartier is like a jewelry company that makes watches, and
Yeah.
the opposite for JLC,
Mhm.
because as we normally do, we don't like, just dig into these company websites when we have like no intention of buying a watch from them in our
Yeah.
spare time until we get ready to do these episodes. And it also helps us to like just keep everything fresh.
Yeah.
The 101, David just said it, the world's smallest movement in a watch. This thing, like, if you have any appreciation for watchmaking, go just put in your phone JLC 101 and look at some of the pieces that they make. These are literal, like, high fine jewelry pieces that basically have a watch attached to them or inside of them. And just to, because it's not the point of the podcast, but just to give a little example, some of the ways that you would set and wind these would be like there's hidden crowns you would move and like press into like a jewel or like a diamond.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's fascinating. So there's bangles, which are like bracelets for women, right? That kind of wrap up and they're encrusted with these huge diamonds. And you
Mm-hmm.
press a button and like a mother of pearl little dial pops out of it, and the diamonds like split open.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some of the most fascinating pieces that I've ever seen. I can only imagine how much they cost. But sorry to interrupt you. I just
Yeah.
want to throw that, and just give the 101 a shout out, because
Yeah.
when I was
Very
doing
cool.
my research, my big takeaway was, wow, JLC is way more of a jewelry company than I ever thought. And
Yeah.
B, I was like, holy shit, that is incredible when you see how small. Like they use the term micro engineering a lot on their website. When you're on the 101 page, you'll
Mm-hmm.
see some of their watchmakers using like tweezers that are holding like a watch movement. It's mind
Yeah.
blowing. So
Yeah.
go check it out if you like that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And again, JLC keeps coming out with these different designs, and I know we've talked about it a bunch with Omega, Rolex, even. There are just some of these brands that don't miss, and JLC is one of them. I mean,
Yeah.
the stuff they come out with is just so intricate, and it's like a watch movement nerd's dream to research. If you love movements and watches, this has got to be one of your top three brands when it just comes to different intricacies. If you just look at the inside of their watches, it's like a maze of just perfection. Honestly, nothing's out of place. A lot of their watches are manual winds, which I know can turn some people off. But again, at this point, you're buying such a history. This is something I don't mind buying as much manual wind, because of the true history of these watch movements, that these have been at the top of their game for going on 200 years. And we talked about the Speedmaster being manual wound, made, came out in the 1950s, 60s. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that I'd rather be automatic, but it's hard to appreciate these old school but very intricate 1800 movements, um, being an automatic watch.
Well, and to the Reverso is the hit. I mean, it's the class of like dress
Yeah.
watches,
Oh yeah.
So I mean,
And
like
that's
in
something
reality,
that's something it's very interesting to me, the switch over from being sporty watches, the Reverso. I mean, we just talked about, you talked about it. It was meant for sports.
mhm,
To, I think it was about 60 years after, in the 80s, 90s, when it made that switch over to dress watches. And now, like you said, Reverso is the quintessential,
yeah,
dress watch. So I think it's very intriguing to me, and I think it's the respect of the movement that's there. I mean, there ain't no way in heck I'll be
right,
using a JLC movement, on a horse.
right.
But yeah. Anyway, so we'll step off, kind of parlay this into the Reverso talk, because that's gonna be the first watch we talk about today. But just understand JLC. Even if it wasn't known by the public, and I know JLC is another one of those brands that it if you know watches, but if you don't, you probably have never heard of this brand.
Hmm.
But JLC for years has been one of the most respected brands by buyers and watch companies, mostly watch companies, because they know the history that they and the stick that they swing when it comes to movements and watches still in Europe today. So stepping off into, again, the JLC watches, the Reverso, I think, is what everybody, when you think about a JLC watch, you think about the Reverso. When you think about a Rolex, most of the people think about a sub. This is their icon piece, and it's what they're known for. And I think it's just one of the coolest watches that I haven't seen, copied anywhere. We always talk about other watch companies copying a sub. I think it's very hard to copy a Reverso, in any way, shape, or form. But this, like Brett said, was originally released in 1931. It has three different kind of subsections of a Reverso. So you have the classic, which is going to be your more, OG, as you can call it, a Reverso. So most of those, I think there might be one, but most of those are going to have the solid steel case back, maybe some engraving on it. But this is really going to hold true to the time period when this came out. You're going to have about a 34 to 35 millimeter by 21 millimeter diameter, height and width of your rectangle watch. So again, this is a little bit smaller. Then you can step over to the Tribute, which is my personal favorite. This has many of the Duetto faces that we talked about. So The Duetto faces, of course, will have 2 dials on the watch, 1 on each side. And the Tribute, I think, has the biggest majority of these. These are a little bit bigger, which is what I like. So you're going to be talking about a 45 millimeter by 27 millimeter, which this is the one I tried on in June and fit my wrist perfectly, which I have around a 6.5-inch wrist. So, if you're around that size, this would probably be the better size, unless you just like smaller watches on your wrist. But the last subsection of the Reverso is actually the one, which is about still as long as the Tribute. It's at 40 millimeters long, but only 20 wide. So you're going to be talking more almost women's watch. If a woman's going to buy a Reverso, this is normally the way they go. They actually have diamond bezels on a lot of these on the one section. So again, a little more dressy, a little different, but it's very fun to just, it's almost like a surprise when you're on their website, because you'll be, oh, that's a very cool front. Let's see what's on the back, and then sometimes be let down. Oh, it's just a, steel case back. Okay. And then other times, oh, holy crap, I wouldn't have even thought that. And so again, very, very cool watches. The Reverso, I think everybody needs one. If you can afford one, you're going to be talking, like we said, 8.5 millimeters case thickness, water resistance of 3 bar. So you're not expecting, much water resistance from this. You're going to be beating at 21,600 beats per hour, 42 hours of power reserve. And of course, this is a manual wound as well. So all of these, I know the 2 I'm talking about are manual wind watches. So of course, manuals don't normally last as long power reserve wise, but I think the intricacies. I don't want to see anybody sitting here doing this with a JLC watch. You want to sit there and enjoy it and love it, and manually wind it yourself every couple times a week.
We need to come up with a term for that people do in stores, even like the dealers and the salespeople
Yeah.
They grab a watch and just shake it. They just do the jiggle. Like the salesman.
The worst is when you see like a dad, showing his son, look at this watch, and he'll sit there and shake it, and then he'll rub it up against his shirt. Got to clean it off for you, kid. Yeah. And you're like, oh, God, you're just twitching over there. But please don't teach him wrong. And but again, a lot of these, all these JLCs, they do come in what they call pink gold, which rose gold, some gold, all different kinds of straps, and even some of these watches come in with calendar dials on the subset. So these are very, very nice watches. Brad, you want to talk about it any?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, like, what is there to say about this watch? There's there's a ton. I know we've already talked and covered a little bit about it, but I mean,
yeah,
like, to go back to the manual wind thing, totally doesn't bother me with this. Like, again, I think it's a dress watch that you might wear like, once or twice a week, and I think that's probably about it, when you're going out to like, your nicest event or lunch or dinner of the week, you might throw this one on. And look, for a guy like me, I mean, if you're watching the video right now, like, I'm wearing a cardigan and a Braves hat, right? Like, I work from home all day. So, like, if I owned one, I probably wouldn't be wearing it a ton, not because I wouldn't love it, but just the nature of the type that it is. So the manual wind doesn't bother me. I think, it's got its place for this type of a watch, and, it's a little bit more intimate maybe. But yeah, man, I remember the first time that I saw one, I think was, I was raising the mic here just a little bit. Let me move that. Yeah, I think the first one that I ever saw had the purple sort of dial.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a duo face. It was just, with the steel blank on the back, but it had that purple dial. And look, guys, me, like, I like a kind of a funky and crazy and fun dial. Was just like enamored by it. And we had Cartier. We covered Cartier a few weeks back, and the Tank and the Santos, they play in a, they're probably the most comparable to this watch. But I mean, I think we've laid it out, like, why you would want this one over it. JLC has, I think, done more in the realm of like horology and achievement. And I mean, it's just a cooler watch.
It's like, just the thing that it's crazy, because the women know Cartier.
Right.
Cartier has the name that the whole world knows, which is why, you got a Cartier watch, you think you hold it up to that standard. Just like, I mean, people that aren't into watches and really don't know much, oh my gosh, you got a Versace watch, you got, once you talk about one of those jewelry watches, you think, oh my God, okay, that's more than I'd ever spend on a watch. And Cartier, to their credit, is much better than those other, watch, Versace,
Like
whoever.
a fashion
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
brand. Yeah.
better. They're the top fashion watch brand out there. But JLC, I think it just hurts JLC because they're known for watches. So only people in in the watch
Right.
community knows how special they are. So but
Right. That's actually really interesting that you bring that up. I mean, like I was just talking to one of my friends just a month or so ago about, a dress watch that he wants to get, and a Cartier tank is one of those, but he was like, the little, the blue crown on it that sort of jets out. It's very prominent. He's like, it just feels like a feminine watch, and it's Cartier. So it's interesting that you say that, because it almost is like you said, Cartier definitely is more well known because everyone just knows, I think, of the, if
the
you're a watch
jewelry
person,
side
the
of it,
watch.
yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't know, or if you don't like watches, then the jewelry side of it. Whereas, to your point, JLC's only watches. But maybe there is like that sort of weird stigma with the Cartier where it's like, people maybe don't go there for a watch because of it. I don't know if that holds any water, but just
I
an
mean,
interesting
I
thought, because
definitely
I've at least
agree.
heard people
Yeah.
talk about how Cartier is or it looks feminine, and it's
Yeah.
maybe just more geared towards a feminine, or a women's dress watch, whereas the JLC Reverso maybe is more geared towards the men's. But you're also very correct in saying that it's not as well known. People
Yeah.
are always going to talk about a tank, and they're cheaper. So you can
Yeah.
get a tank and you can get a Santos for half the cost too.
And
So
I
I
think
think it
that's
is.
part of the reason why I really don't like the tank is I think you hit the nail on the head. It is a little more feminine. It's so thin,
Mm,
it's feminine. And so I'm like, but the Santos is not. It to me is
yeah.
very manly and is on but it's almost too manly to the point where it's sporty. So then I'm
Mm,
like, okay, if I'm buying a Cartier,
it's
I
not
want to
dressy
buy a
enough.
dress watch, but their dress watches are too thin and almost feminine enough to where I'm just like, it isn't bold enough for me. I don't even know if feminine's the way. It's just too thin. I don't want to say cheap, but
Yeah.
it just doesn't do it for me. I don't like the way it fits. I took a picture of it, and I like the picture of it on my wrist, but I remember how it felt when it was actually on my wrist, and I not like it.
Yeah.
And but so I'm like, okay, then I'd have to buy a Santos. But then I'm like, why am I buying a Cartier Santos if it's going to be a sporty watch? I have enough sporty watches. So I think that definitely hit the nail on the head when you said the JLC is the perfect, more masculine looking watch that's also dressy. So I think it's just, even if it wasn't a reverso and that was just one side, it didn't flip
Right.
around, I think that's still a much better looking watch than the tank.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, they're definitely competitors, but yeah, I think they're just distinguished enough, and
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that's the distinguishment. It's a little bit of a bolder watch on the JLC side. So
Yeah.
yeah, man. Yeah, ready to move on, or
Yeah.
any last
That's it.
thoughts?
Let's
Okay.
move on.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the Polaris Automatic, which is just think of this as the JLC Polaris, just like the base model.
Yeah.
So to go back sort of to the top of the episode, I talked about how I didn't really notice how much of a jewelry company that JLC actually is until doing the research for this episode, but I did find that out. And so I am going to cheat a little bit today. I'm going to talk about two different Polarises. So I'm going to stay in that same collection, but I think that that's fair because I wanted to put some balance into the show. David's going to be talking about two sport watches. So I wanted to, or I'm sorry, two dress watches,
Yeah.
including the Reverso that we just covered. So I wanted to bring in some sport flair and some vintage and like heritage flair with the second go around. But we'll go ahead and start up with the Polaris Automatic, or the base model Polaris, as I'm going to refer to it, I guess. Original release date for the Polaris lineup was going to be 1956. This model is going to be in stainless steel, 41 millimeter case diameter. It's not going to be square, not going to be rectangular. So if you're listening and you're not, if you're just not very familiar with anything else from JLC, as truth be told, I was not, or still am not really, then the Polaris is just going to be kind of a more sporty circular dial watch in a much more traditional design, right? Case thickness is going to be 11.2 millimeters, so going to be pretty thin there. 100 meters of water resistance, going to be using the caliber Jaeger LeCoultre 898, beating at 28,800 beats per hour with a 40-hour power reserve. And cost on this is going to be 10,500. This is technically a dive watch, but it's not really. And this is going to be one of the, I hate to do this to JLC because I love the Reverso so much, but it's going to be one of the brands for the first time in maybe a long time that I've really picked on a brand. So this is technically a dive watch, like I said, but it does not meet ISO 6425 standards. If you're not familiar with that, it's simply a standardization process for dive watches to be rated for. So it does not meet that 200 meter of water resistance. So let's, for the sake of argument, let's just call this a sport watch, just
I
like
was
the
gonna say
Rolex.
this to me kind of because of that, and just really looks seems to be more of like an explorer watch, like the Explorer 2 for Rolex, kind of like
Yeah.
the outdoorsy watch but on land.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. Because it's, I was gonna say kind of sport like a Datejust or a Monta Noble or a Tudor Royal to throw a few comparisons out there. But to your point, I mean, look, it does have a dive bezel basically, and it does have dive functionality.
Mhm.
So yeah, but it's just I don't know, it's just a little bit weird. The fact that they do have a dive watch, and we'll talk about another Polaris in just a moment that kind of has the same sort of issue with it to me, but the fact that they make a dive watch and it's so pretty, like they try to
Yeah.
make it so nice looking, is just a little bit weird. So I'm sure that some people like it out there, but I personally have never seen anyone with one on. I've never heard anyone talk
Yeah.
about wanting one.
It
You
would
and
not
I have never
surprise me if
brought it
they
up.
sold 10 in the entire world. I've
Yeah,
never seen these.
and
Yeah.
it's just an just kind of a little quirky little watch because when you look at it, you can tell like, okay, this is very unique design. They've clearly not ripped anyone off, and we give them props for that. They've actually
Yeah.
gone so far as to do some interesting little bits where if you pull a picture of this up, it'll immediately make sense to you. But they sort of polish and brush their links in the bracelet in sort of like an opposite manner that most people do. What I mean by that is that the center links are actually brushed with the outer links
Mhm.
being polished. So
Yeah.
that in and of itself is pretty weird.
Yeah.
It's also, let's not forget, a dive watch with polish, a lot of polish on it actually. So that's a little bit oxymoronic, I suppose. Um, I don't
I
know.
don't know.
It's just a funky watch. I mean, look, if you want a JLC and you want to go sporty and you want to go like just sleek and very straightforward, then that's why I chose this watch. So don't hear what I'm not saying that it's like a piece of shit watch. I just think that it's a little bit quirky and
But
weird.
who would do that?
Well, I don't know.
It's a
I don't know.
watch, I agree, it's a watch that I feel like doesn't have an identity almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They've taken a dive watch and they've let people design it
It's
that know too much about jewelry
yeah.
with that mentality behind it, and I
It's
think that
like their lawyer said, "Hey, you have to make a dive watch." Like, and they're like, "Well, we don't. We make dress watches."
yeah,
Well, it doesn't matter. You have to. Okay,
yeah.
well, let's throw this together and throw it out there
It's like
because
all of their
we know we'll sell
designers
10 of them. It's
yeah.
fine. And
It's
make it
almost
stupid expensive because these base ones are even more than expensive than a Reverso. So, but
yeah.
let's throw it out there. Yeah.
That's the other kind of complaint is that not only, it's I guess it's yeah, to wrap that point right there up, it's like you can't go get this JLC for 4 grand. It might be ugly and a little bit weird, and it might be a dive watch that sucks for diving purposes, which let's not kid ourselves. Like none of us use our dive watches for diving, but point notwithstanding, yeah, it's just a weird watch.
Yeah.
But I
It's
don't know.
over 10 grand for a watch that one doesn't have an identity to who's buying a JLC to beat it around. Even if I'm saying, okay, throw
Exactly.
diving out the window and let's say this is a field watch.
Yeah.
Who's buying a JLC to field watch? And they understand that. I feel like, again, I really think they were told, hey, you have to have a sports watch because if somebody just only buys from JLC, they want a sports watch. So they threw
Yeah.
this together. I mean, I don't sit there and expect Hamilton to make great dress watches because they're sport watches. I don't expect JLC to make great sport watches because they're known for their dress watches.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mega makes amazing sporty watches. They don't have the greatest looking dress watches. Let's call it what it is. But they have amazing sports watches. Each brand has their niche, and then they still have to do something the other direction for
Yeah.
those few people that want it. And this is that. And I think it's kind of an FU that they're selling over 10, 11 grand when I can go over there and buy a Reverso, even if it has a steel case back for 7,000.
Right.
I'm buying a
Right.
$7,000 Reverso.
And to I guess I guess to slow the barrage that we're dropping on JLC right here. This collection rather did release originally in 1956. So I I know that
At
back
this
then.
size diameter? These things look big.
Well, no. I'm just saying that like
Okay.
the Polaris collection, like
Okay.
the
Yeah.
Polaris is not a new watch, is basically what I'm
Yeah.
saying. So
Okay.
my point with that being, I don't, I would imagine that back then, well, I mean, I know that, there's not as much polishing and there probably was a bit of a need for them to offer something. And
Mm.
I mean, I think maybe more realistically is that happened. They wanted to offer divers. I mean, 1956, let's not forget, right? Black Bay 54, Black Bay 58,
Yeah.
the Rolex
They had to throw
Submariners
it out there.
became,
Yeah.
exactly, the Rolex subs became extremely popular in
Isn't
the
it
50s.
funny?
So
I hate
maybe
to,
that's what it was. And now it's just continued, but it's continued with this jewelry high class design behind it.
yeah, I hate to
You know?
take off in a tangent and tear him, but it it's funny how back then in
Do
the
it.
50s, everybody loves to act like history doesn't repeat itself, but it does. In all aspects. That's why everybody says you need no history, so you try not to the bad history you don't repeat. But even the good history always repeats itself. In the 50s, there were so many dive watches. Dive watches were huge. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, what watches did our dads wear? It was 34 millimeters were big in there. It was dress watches,
Yeah.
very dressy. And then hit 2010, even 2000s, it went back to dives. It's funny how it just ebbs and flows, and dive watches are the whole fad right now. Everybody loves a dive watch. Everybody's trying to copy dive watches. And this isn't the first time that's happened. And again, it's in the 50s, and then in the 80s and 90s, it was nothing but dress watch. I mean, you can't tell me, what does a Rolex day date champagne dial remind you of? 1990.
Yeah.
Is what my granddad wore. It's just funny how it ebbs and flows. And anyways, I just thought
That's
that was
true.
interesting.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, look, we're just giving our opinion on it. There are people out there that probably love it.
Yeah.
Whatever. To each their own.
They don't
that's
take
fine.
it 200 meters down, though. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I mean, probably not. I'll tell you what. If you own a Polaris, really
Let us
curious.
know.
Just
Yeah.
I'm pretty genuinely curious. Like,
We will
is
feature
is
you
that-
in the next episode if you own a Polaris. But you got to show it to prove it.
Well, you know what I'm thinking? Like, the Polaris probably is not created for, but is probably retained in the current collection for people that are JLC enthusiasts, not watch
Yeah.
enthusiasts. That would be my best guess, is that I own several JLC Reversos probably before I approach a Polaris.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe it's my second JLC because I just had such a perfect experience with my Reverso and I love it so much.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well,
if
like
you're
I
one of those
said,
people, let us know.
they make it for the people that only buy JLCs, like you said.
Exactly.
This is their third one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyways, let's shift gears here and a little more positive note. This is a watch style, collection that I'll never own, and probably 99.9% of the people that listen to us will never own because they're too expensive, but they're ridiculous when it comes to technology and just, again, intricacy of a watch. I mean, this is what JLC is known for, is stepping away from the sports, because nobody knows JLC as a sporty watch. They're known for their dress watches. So this is the Duometer, I guess you would call it. It's spelled European, but meter. But it's 42
spelled European. wait, hold on. I want to tell a quick story. So in Amsterdam, I had been once before. My buddy Jordan had not. So we did a canal tour, and one of the first questions that the tour guide asked, he's like, does anyone here know how deep the canals are? And I probably knew it back in deep in my brain, but I was kind of guessing. And I just said 10 feet. And the guy looked at me like I was so wrong. Like how could you be any stupider? I don't even think stupid is a real word.
Feet.
And he goes, yes, the canals in Amsterdam are 3 meters. Or sorry.
Were you right though? Did you say 10 was 10 feet right?
Yeah. So 10 feet's right. And he's like, there are 3 meters or 10 feet. He gave me this side eye. He was kind of messing with me about it. So yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Dang tourists. Well, how many people that are on those things are not tourists though? I mean, he probably hears that every single.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Every
No, he was
single
being playful with it for sure.
Yeah.
But I always get a good crack up of you and I mispronouncing everything.
It's the charm. So, anyways, these watches are great. You're talking, 50 to $60,000, but they are the quintessential. You think of the Rolex 1908, what it's trying to be. These are that times a million, with all the intricacies. A 50-hour power reserve. So we're stepping up here. Vibrations are 28,800 beats per hour. So the crazy thing about this, there's two different watches I have pictured here, Brett, for you, and we'll post these as well. The first one, the one on the left, is called the Travel Time. So actually, I'm sorry, I have that backed up. The one on the left is called the Quantime Lunar. So it has a moon phase on its all of this is on its dial. A moon phase, a flyback second, obviously second hands, hour hands, minutes, jumping seconds, a twin power reserve, date, all of this on the same dial. So you have your lunar phase, your calendar. I mean, all of this is ridiculous to all put on one dial that you can see. On top of it all, you have a skeleton backing.
I think I'm looking at the same one with no skeleton.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's packed in there. So what are the... I know on the skeleton it doesn't look the same. I was going to ask you what these little indicators at the bottom. There's like a small little circle with like a little plus arrow at the end of it, but I guess on the skeleton it's either not there or you just can't see it. So that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say I don't see it. And then the other one, not skeleton. I kind of like this one even better. It has a map of the world again on the dial of the watch. A map of the world, a twin power reserve, second time zone, world time, seconds, day night indicator, jumping hour, and minute, all on the dial. And it's all so elegantly put on. It's not even the skeleton dial's a lot, but this one that is called the travel time, it really seems kind of, I don't want to say toned down, but not overwhelming like a lot of these. Like you would think it would be with a whole map of the world, moon phase. I mean, all of
it doesn't sound as complicated as what David spoke it to be. There's it doesn't look as complicated. Very well. Yeah, they package it extremely well.
Yeah. So again, these are very cool watches. These are going retail around 50 to 60,000 depending on what you get. But if you just want the all-in-one encompassing and you have 50,000, 60,000 even to spend, this is one of the coolest watches I've ever seen. They all come in actually what they again call pink gold, so it is gold. A lot of these are on croc straps, leather straps. So again, you still have that dressiness on it. It reminds me a lot of like the more dressy Patek Philippe's and watches
Calatravos
like
and 1908s and
it is along that line, but the functions of it is, I've said, the 1908 is pretty, but it's so underwhelming. And one, functions, and then two, just even dial this dial. It's astounding. And again, we'll show this the day that we release the episode. And yeah, so again, the caliber movement is the JLC caliber 381. So again, very all in house as you would expect, manually wound.
50-hour power reserve.
Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, with all of that function moving at all time. Because you'll notice both of these have the twin power reserves, so it has a little more oomph to it. Because if you're gonna again put together a map of the world, a second time zone, a world time, a day night indicator, a jumping hour, and minute hand, you've got to, and to still have it over 2 days is very impressive. So again, very cool watch. Something that I don't think, let us know again if you own one of these, because you'll be one of the few. But just something I want to highlight. We'll post pictures of these. We'll post some pictures of them on people's wrists as well, so you can kind of see. And a very cool watch. But now back to the old Polaris.
Oh boy, this one is
this one's cool. We talked about this one in the history though. Yeah.
This one's a little bit nicer. So we're gonna move on to the Polaris Mariner Memovox. So we did touch on this on the history. So if you weren't paying attention, go back. Original release date for the Memovox collection, 1968. It's gonna be made of stainless steel, of course, and 42 millimeter case diameter here. Another dive watch, as the name Polaris and Mariner would suggest. And this one, though, a little chunky boy, it's going to be coming in at 15.63 millimeters thick. Just for reference, I wanted to share.
Got a whole dang alarm clock in there.
It does, man. It does. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about that. For reference, on the case thickness, Black Bay 58, 11.9 millimeter, and the original Black Bay Heritage was an even 15 millimeter. So this one is, I wouldn't quite call it slab sided, but it's definitely getting up there. Water resistance on this one, thank the Lord, 300 meters. They made a real dive watch. And I believe this one has the GLC caliber 956 beating inside at 4 hertz and a power reserve of 44 hours to go along with that. Now, this particular model, the Mariner Memovox, is going to be a little bit more expensive, actually quite more expensive than the base model Polaris, about 2x. So this one's going to be $20,600. And yeah, doing some research on this. Well, yeah, let's
inhale that. Yeah.
Yeah.
$20,000.
A $21,000 dive watch from JLC. I mean, it's cool, and we'll talk about it, but
you get the great JLC movement in it. So, for what are these manually wound?
I do know this, that the alarm has to be wound separate from the actual watch. How crazy is that? So, so what I understand is that if the alarm is fully wound, and only if it's fully wound, that the alarm time, the actual alarm sound, will time for 20 to 25 seconds. So the duration of the alarm actually depends on how much the alarm is wound. So pretty crazy.
So it's kind of like one of those old school clocks that you used to wind up and
yeah. So and I don't know, for whatever reason.
It is automatic wound, by the way. These are automatic.
Okay. Automatic wind. Okay. So automatic wind on the watch, and then I would assume that means that the alarm needs to be independently wound, and maybe manually, it is automatically wound, but it's sounding like it needs to be manually wound. Yeah. And I guess just I just had the thought in my head that the alarm function was going to be somewhat digitized. I guess that's just where my brain goes when you think of like an alarm clock.
You think of like Seiko and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, maybe so. But yeah, fully mechanical. So very, very cool. And another really interesting thing about this. So again, this is a dive watch, and if you've ever looked at a picture of a Polaris, I'm sure you'll kind of wonder like how it actually operates, because the bezel sits right alongside the dial. So it's kind of like this, it's almost like a step dial, but it's like a step bezel rather. Mm-hmm. So the bezel is actually contained under the sapphire crystal, and you move that by using one of the crowns. So really kind of interesting design there too, because it's basically a dive watch that has 3 crowns like you would see on a chronograph. So again, one of those is obviously going to pull out. It's going to have hacking seconds, and you'll set, date and time there. Another one you'll use to actually rotate the bezel, which will rotate the, of course, the dive bezel function so that you could start the count up timer. And then the third crown is going to be used to wind, but also set the alarm. So the alarm, you can move it and you can align it to actually do like a demonstrative alarm, which is pretty cool. And so I heard that on a video, watched someone sort of flipping around with it, and sounds just like you would expect. Sounds like a little bell, a little metal on metal bell. So very interesting that we still have this in production in 2023. And even more so, I think a little bit shocking that we have it at $20,600. Yeah, man. I mean, dive watches are cool and everything, but yeah, it's a little bit interesting. So
yeah, I mean, it's definitely different. This watch, I can tell, I feel like maybe, I mean, again, we're picking on the other one, but this watch seems to have much more effort put into it. I mean, very cool looking. The bezel being under the sapphire crystal is very, very different. Like you said, you don't see that very much. 44 hours of time reserve, so I'm not very much again, but JLC is obviously just not big into the fake time reserve because it's so precise, and that's what's going to help it take. I mean, ticking at almost 28,000 beats per hour and only having 45 hours of time.
It's pretty low. Yeah. You typically see kind of the opposite direction. I will say, to wrap up my thoughts on this one, though, this one does do, like, the cost aside, I mean, that's, I don't know. I feel redundant in saying the cost aside, because I feel like, to me, that's a deal breaker. But what I was going to say is, the cost aside, if you can ignore that for just a moment, this watch I do appreciate a little bit more. because the design is really fascinating. It reminds me of almost like a piece of like wearable tech. It looks more like a smartwatch than it does a
Yeah.
mechanical watch for sure.
Yeah.
And that's not, I wouldn't say that that's a bad thing. I just think that that's kind of the way that it is presented. I think the way that they do that sort of degradé, um, sort of coloring where the outer edge of the dial and the bezel is very, very dark and the center is lighter blue.
Hmm.
There's also some more attention to detail on the dial where that center dial um, has the has the alarm. There's a little center moving dial similar to like a Rolex Sky Dweller where the center dual time would be. That is like a smooth sunray dial surface, and then the outer ring is like a pebbled sort of textured dial. So I think there's just a lot more attention to detail with this one. I think that, for the price point, at least you're getting a little bit more, but again, it's overpriced.
Yeah.
But
That
if
ain't
you
worth
can afford it, you're
$10,000.
getting more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
But there are some very snooty people that they're never going to buy anything less than JLC, Rolex, Vacheron, and Patek. So if they got to slum it down to a dive watch, here's their slum dive watch at
yeah,
$20,000. So
it's
enjoy it.
so
If I had all the
interesting,
money
man.
in the world, I guess that's what I'd do too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what it is. It's just we don't make enough money because there
Yeah.
are about 40 other dive watches that I would rather have in front of a JLC Polaris,
Yeah.
and about
And
half of the
35 of them are
reason
Rolexes that are $12,000.
I was just gonna say, and about half the reason there's so many is because they're all cheaper.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, it's really it's this one to me is not even a knock on the watch. It's just a knock on
The price.
the price
This watch should
combined.
be $11,000 to $12,000, and then I would say, okay, that's
Yeah.
cool.
And
Yeah.
I think, yeah, and maybe you offered the other one base for 8 or 9 and this one's
Yeah.
10, 11, 13 maybe. And then I
Yeah.
think that now you have a market for a diver and maybe JLC can expand a little bit. Obviously they don't care about what you and I have to say, but for a consumer, for just a run of the mill consumer, yeah, I think people would look at this when it was 10, 12, 14, but to have a 10 and a $20,000 option and that's it is, I don't know. Maybe it's out of touch. I don't know. I mean, I'm not afraid to say that. It is, I think, out of touch because I don't know anyone that owns this.
Yeah.
And I know some
I
pretty
mean,
wealthy people that have
we
got
could
APs
find
and
out that this
Pateks,
is
but
their second best selling watch out there and be completely wrong. But I mean, I think we're pretty hitting the nail
I
on the
don't think so.
head.
I
I don't
don't think
think so.
so.
Bet you that $60,000 watch is selling better than.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all right.
All right, man. Well, any final thoughts today? That's kind of all I had for
I mean,
the
I
last
think this
watch.
is yeah. I mean, I think this is definitely the step up of we've now done two brands that are in the upper echelon. I don't trust me. I'm not knocking Omega or Breitling because they are both amazing watches, and I wish I could have 20 of them. But
Hmm.
Rolex, just because the marketing standpoint and the brand recognition, the stake they wield with that's upper echelon. Then JLC is definitely up there, and like we always talked about, we'll talk about a few. We still have the very expensive ones. I'm very much looking forward to Vacheron, obviously Patek, all of those guys coming down the pipeline here in the next few months. But I think just bang for your buck, quality when you're talking about certain watches that they offer, and that's really it with most of them. I mean, I'll give it to Rolex again. Most of their watches, I feel like if you can actually get them at retail, are fairly priced,
Oh yeah,
but you
I
can't.
definitely
So,
agree.
so,
Yeah.
but most watch companies that you buy, you're buying a Patek, you're buying a couple of them. You're not gonna, you wouldn't buy any dang Patek other than just wanting to have the value of it. I'm talking about for actual love of the watch. You're not buying any dang Patek that you find. You'll find a few that you like, and that's what you're buying. Same thing with AP. Same thing with Vacheron, definitely. And I feel like same thing with JLC. We're not sitting here going to buy a Polaris, but we would sit here and buy a Reverso. We would sit
Yeah.
there and probably buy an Ultra Thin, which is a watch we haven't talked about that I'm sure we will when we swing back here, down the road, of another very good watch. They hit the nail on the head with about three of their dress watches, and of course Reverso being one, then the other two being just more normal looking dress watches. So just find your niche. Each watch has their niche of watches you would buy, and I think for what Reverso is known for, they do great.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. The Reverso is where you're supposed to. I think that's where you're going to have fun with JLC, and that's where
Yeah.
I would just guess that's where 90% of people are getting their JLCs. It's going to be in the Reverso collection. So
Yeah.
and that's why I felt okay talking about 2 divers, because I wanted to add some flair, not just 4 dress watches. Because if you're not a dress watch person, then the episode's kind of boring to you. And I think it's interesting to just look at how they're sort of positioning their lineups too, because I think this clearly tells us that even though they're slumming it down to a dive watch, which is just call it like an everyman's watch, they're still not going to give you a run-of-the-mill diver. They're going to.
Oh no.
They've definitely created something very unique. They've gone back into their books and pulled the old alarm back out with the Memovox that released in 2018. They're still making that, so they're not afraid to do it, but they're going to do it in their own way.
They're going to put a price tag.
And that way is going to be very French. It's going to be very pretty, and it's going to be very expensive. So if you're not into those 3 things, then I would just advise sticking with the Reverso, and I think you'll be more than happy.
Oh yeah, more than happy at that great price as well.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for jumping back in here with us. It was super fun. Yeah, looking forward to it. We'll be back with another episode in a few weeks. See you, buddy.
See ya. I actually heard it that time. I hear the music now.
You just spoke over it.
Leave it in. That'll be good.